got the cornfield calm, Midwest tone, but he's spitting facts like a dog with a bone. Lanky frame, fire-haired eyes on the case, breaking down the game in the darkest place. Sports scores to murder boards, Hoosier logic cuts like swords. From Friday lights to chalked out lines, this redhead's brain rewrites the lines inside the Hoosier mind, where the stories twist and stats unwind. He's a legend in flannel, mic in hand, digging deep where few can stand. From touchdowns to crime scenes raw, he's got the truth in every draw. Yeah, step in if you dare to find what's brewing inside the Hoosier mind. He'll talk Pacers, Colts, or Colts on trial. Hoosier humor with a devilish smile. He's that redhead sleuth with a box of clues, takes your headline, breaks the news. With every stat and every scream, he's painting portraits in your stream. Don't blink, he'll tie it tight. From game night wins to murder flight. Inside the Hoosier mind, where the facts hit hard and the lines are blind. He's a ginger ninja, sleuth and slick, cracking cases play by play quick. From courtrooms to the hardwood floor, he digs for more than just the score. Tune in and don't rewind, you're deep now inside the Hoosier mind.
All right, what's up, everyone? Welcome into Inside the Hoosier Mind, brought to you by Military Broadcast Radio, who helps give veterans a voice, helps them tell their stories, and again, most importantly, lets their voices be heard, as well as Gunfighter Beard Company. Great beer company. They provide all sorts of different type of beard care products and products for the ladies as well. So if you want to smell good, if you want to have a great beard, if you want to look good and feel good, gunfighterbeardco.com. Whole bunch of great stuff. He's got Copycats of great cologne scents. They last a long time. Absolutely great stuff. So we are just at the peak beginning of college football, unfortunately, being done for the season. With that, though, there's always this little bit of drama that's playing it. And it's not as bad now, but it'll definitely pick up after the spring game, and it'll really pick up when it comes into July timeframe. Right before the season starts, we'll have all this drama pop up. And I thought, in the meantime, why don't we continue to just kind of see what the drama looks like as we talk about some of the coaches with the biggest pressure on them going into 2026. And what I mean by that is coaches that I think either have really high expectations set for them and they need to meet, or they're going to potentially be fired, and I think they might even be fired within the season. So before we get started, though, like, share, subscribe, comment. Let me know what you think. Is there anybody that I missed on this list? Is there anybody that deserves to be higher? Is there anybody that deserves to be taken off? Is there anybody that you would put on here? Let me know what your guys' thoughts are. Let me know what your guys' lists are in the comments. So without further ado, let's get into the list itself. So I do have an honorable mention on here, and I want to say honorable mention as well as number 10 do tie together, because to me, their longevity and their stances as coaches solely depend on how this upcoming season factors out. And so I'll go into more specifics as we go into the first one. First one is the honorable mention. I'm going to say Kalen DeBoer. Now, some people may argue with me on that, and they think, oh, why is Kalen on the hot seat? There's no way. Obviously, you saw number 10. To me, Kalen is on the hot seat because of the expectations that are set for him at Alabama. And it's not his fault. He's following Nick Saban's shoes. So that's a really big set of shoes and footprints that you have to fill. And it's not that he hasn't been good at winning games. That's really the bad part. Right now, as it stands, he's 20-8 at Alabama. He's 1-2 in their bowl games. And it's not that he can't beat quality opponents. He can absolutely beat some of the best teams. He's losing to teams that he shouldn't, and he's losing in really, really bad ways there at Alabama. So, for example, we can look at last year. They beat number 5 Georgia, they beat number 16 Vandy, they beat number 14 Mizzou, they beat number 11 Tennessee all in a row. Those, 4 top, technically top 20 teams all in a row, beat all of them, which hadn't been done before and is extremely impressive. But he has losses to Florida State to start the season, which was really the highlight of Florida State's entire season, given how Florida State ended up finishing. They lost to number 11 Oklahoma, which was a solid team. And then they lose to Georgia in the SEC championship. They do get a revenge game by beating Oklahoma in the first round of the playoffs, but then they're absolutely embarrassed by Indiana shortly after, who ultimately ended up winning the national title. And that's just last year, right? So he can beat quality opponents, which isn't a problem. What again is really hurting him is the games that he's not supposed to lose. So he lost the game against Florida State. That's not really what you do at Alabama. And then if we look at last year, even he lost to Vandy. Now I'm going to give him a pass on Vandy because this is the Diego Pavia led Vanderbilt team, who this is when we were starting to discover, okay, this is actually a really good Vanderbilt team. It's not the Vandy that we know of old. They lost to Vandy. They lost to Tennessee, who Tennessee and Josh Heupel, absolutely great. I'm going to definitely talk about them later on in the offseason. And they lost to a really, really bad, really, really injury-riddled Oklahoma team last year. But they beat number 2 Georgia. They beat number 2 Mizzou. They beat number 15 LSU last year. So the quality wins are there. It's just he loses the games that you're not supposed to lose at Alabama. Now, if they had lost like they did this past season of losing to, top ranked Oklahoma, that's not bad. If you lose to Georgia in a game that, kind of matters like the SEC championship, okay. Now, if they lost to Indiana in a close game, I don't think this is really even a consideration. They got blown out by Indiana. It was 38-3 was the final score. Like, that's embarrassing. No, you don't see that from an Alabama team typically. And again, even if you want to give them a pass for the first game against Florida State last year, you can. It's the first game of the season. Maybe they expected Florida State to not be as good because they finished Florida State finished the prior season 2-10. I don't really know. But that is something to me that is really going to probably get him in trouble. And honestly, to me, I feel that Alabama is at this point at kind of a crossroads of he can win games. He can beat the big opponents. He can win the games that matter. It's you're losing the games that I'm not going to say don't matter, but you're losing the games that you shouldn't. And for Alabama, at that point, then where do you go? I know there's the rumor that they might try to steal Lane Kiffin. And to me, I do have a couple theories about this, and this is going to go off on kind of a little random tangent TED talk. To me, I have 2 thoughts. Is the Lane Kiffin at LSU, is this kind of his first test of let me go to a Power 4 school that there's a lot of high expectations. It's all but, championship or bust for LSU is their mentality of being better. They want to compete for national titles consistently. So is that the first thought of we have to win and we have to win right now? Not only are you going to a Power 4 team that has those expectations, but you at least have the pedigree, you have the money, you have the backing, and you have the historical significance of that university as well, of being able to put quality NFL players in the league for many, many years, and especially in most recent years. So is this his test to see how does this work? As well as, and this is going to tie into my second point, is it a way for him to see Alabama up close and truly personal by being at LSU and having to face Alabama fairly regularly? Because he sees what Kalen DeBoer inherited from Nick Saban. He sees a lot of the players, he sees a lot of the tactics. And so as he watches Kalen, is it one of those, do I want to go deal with that? Do I want to deal with even more pressure? Do I want to deal with a school that you could probably argue kids are going to be more drawn to go to because of the historical significance that Nick Saban has brought within the last few years to Alabama of making them an NFL pipeline? But you have the same argument for LSU. So it'll be interesting to see where Alabama does as far as their whole entire crossroads. Do they keep Kalen? Do they try to get Lane? Do they, move on from Kalen and they try to go a completely different direction? We really don't know. But I did feel that depending on how this season goes, Kalen may or may not be out at Alabama. But again, it depends on how this season finishes, who he beats, who he loses to. But I felt that he was an honorable mention. The other guy that I feel his seat's definitely warm. I don't think it's hot. I don't think he's going to get fired like 2 games into the season, but I do feel his seat is getting warm, and that's Dabo. And part of this is because Dabo has really refused to evolve with college football over the last few years, especially with the development and the implementation of NIL. He's been really hesitant. We've heard a lot of the rumors. We've heard a lot of player reports that basically if you want to go to Clemson, you either go or you don't. And that's just Dabo's thought. He's known to pull scholarships, don't even think about visiting anybody else. Don't even think about talking to anybody else. If you do, the scholarships getting pulled. And to an extent, I respect that because you're trying to do your own homegrown talent. You're trying to find somebody that was truly loyal to Clemson. You're trying to find people that want to be at Clemson and be a Clemson Tiger. I 100% have respect for that. That's really, really hard to implement now, though, with new NIL deals, with the money that kids can make, with the opportunities that kids may or may not have. You're not going to be able to stockpile those 4 and 5 star guys on your roster anymore if they don't have an opportunity to start, or even the inkling of a chance of, hey, you might get a chance to. They're probably going to leave. Now, the reason why I put him lower on 10, it's kind of the same as Kalen. It's ultimately going to depend on how does this season end up coming about. He went 7-6 last year after there's a whole lot of expectations. There's people that even picked Clemson to win the national title. They had all the experience. They had a lot of really good players. I think a lot of the players on this team is probably going to end up going later in the first round of the NFL draft, even in the high second round for the second day of the draft. But nonetheless, though, he can recruit, he can build players, he can absolutely build a great team. He's 187-53 with Clemson at his time there, and he's won 2 national titles. So that's why I think depending on how this season goes, they may wait till the end of the year to let him go, just as a common courtesy and one of the best coaches that Clemson has had in their history. But it's really, really difficult to sit here and say that, Dabo's not on a pretty warm seat. And I do feel bad as well for Dabo with the NIL thing, because the first time he tries to jump into it, we have the Luke Ferrelli situation of, guy coming in and tampering, changing this kid's mind. He's at Clemson, he's enrolled, he's ready to go, he's in class. And then the head coach of Ole Miss allegedly comes in, offers him money, gets him to leave Clemson and go to Ole Miss and be the linebacker there. So I do feel bad for Dabo in that part, but I would also say in an ever-evolving sport, I don't care how long you've done something, you have to be willing to adapt and change. And it just seems like something that Dabo has not been willing to do. Number 9, I have Lincoln Riley. Kind of the same thing. I think that he's not necessarily on the hot seat just yet, but it is warm. And I say that because of what he's done at USC and what he's done, especially since they joined the Big Ten. So he's 35-18 at USC. Not terrible. It's good. It's not terrible. But compared to what he left when he was at Oklahoma, he was 55-10. His worst season at Oklahoma, he was 9-2 during the COVID year. The best stretch of time he was there was from 2017, 2019. He was 12-2 every single year. So he's 36-6 at one point at Oklahoma. Then 2021, he was 10-2. That was his last year. Then he goes to USC. Caleb Williams comes with him, turns him into a Heisman winner. They finish 11-3. Ever since then, not really a whole lot. Like their best year, I believe, was last year. They were 9-4 in their second year now in the Big Ten. So not really a lot of promise there. I mean, they are getting better. He has finally replaced and gotten him some decent defensive coordinators. But there's, to me, the big question of you can still recruit. You still get some of the best recruiting classes, but it just seems as though you can't put them together. And ever since you lost your generational type of quarterback in Caleb Williams, you haven't been able to recreate that. Even with Miller Moss, now you have Maiava, not bad, hasn't really been, that super sensational type of guy. So you can develop players, you can get players transferred in, and they lose players like every other team does. And you're coming into a significantly tougher conference. But there's a lot of expectations for USC this year. There's a lot of expectations. I don't necessarily know about winning the Big Ten, but they could definitely make it kind of a deep run and maybe even sneak into the playoffs as a dark horse. Um, but to me, his seat's a little bit warm. Now, Bill Belichick at number 8. Now, I know a lot of people, they're like, why? He's in his second year. That first year was really, really rough. That was a really bad North Carolina team last year, especially with all the hype, all of his pedigree, all of everything that he's had throughout his time. And, this is his first time being in college football. Last year, he's kind of getting his feet wet, seeing how things go. So again, I'm not going to say he's on the hot seat. I don't think they would fire him in the middle of the season unless something just went absolutely totally wrong. But it does lead a lot of questions. He's 4-8 last year, so not great in an ACC conference that you didn't really have a lot of, I guess, depth. Georgia Tech looked really good at one point. They started to fall apart. Florida State obviously started out hot. They lost 4 games in a row, especially in conference after that. Miami looked really, really good, kind of stumbled there for a little bit. SMU has actually been fairly consistent. Clemson started out really good. They started to fall off. So a lot of your big powerhouse teams didn't really do as well as you could have thought. So it was kind of there for the taking. And it just seemed like they didn't have the talent. They weren't really well prepared. And they just had the ball absolutely ran all over them the entire time. So again, I don't think Bill Belichick's necessarily on the hot seat coming into this. I do think his seat is warm. I think that depending on how this goes, they may try to part ways. The other part, there was the drama even towards about the end of the season of him wanting to leave, of him wanting to take his staff, of him just being done, not going to meetings, not, talking with people and whatnot. So I think again, the possibility is there. Again, I don't think that they would fire a mid-season, but I do think his seat is fairly, fairly warm. Now, this next guy, I think his seat is a little bit warmer than Bill's, only because of the timeline that he's had since being there, and that's Deion. Now, with Deion, it's one of those, I get why they keep him, but I would also understand why they would fire him. And the reason being, he's 16-21 at Colorado right now. Now, prior to Colorado, when he was at Jackson State, he was 27-6, but that was with his sons. That was with Shedeur, that was with Shiloh, that was with Travis Hunter. Goes to Colorado. Now, the first season, not really that great. They went 4-8 their first season. Then they turn around, they go 9-4 the following season. Best season that he's had as a head coach there at the Power 4 level with Colorado, which is great. The first year without them, though, at Colorado, they went 3-9. And now I asked this a little bit earlier last year of does Deion, deserve to be fired or not? And some Colorado fans actually see him as this is his first true year since, Shedeur, since Shiloh, since Travis are all gone. Of okay, this is your first year. Let's see what we've got. And it wasn't great. I didn't really know what to expect out of Colorado. But I did somewhat expect a little bit better, especially with the Big 12 having a lot of parity. The conference was essentially wide open last year up until we found out the amount of money that Texas Tech spent on quality players. They got them. And more than likely, it looks like Texas Tech is going to be the big dog that runs the Big 12 at the current moment and for the foreseeable future. But to me, there's a lot of questions, and I want to know everybody else's thoughts. Does Deion deserve more time to get himself established, or do you think they move on and find somebody else? And it's one of those. He's great when he's with his sons. Maybe he tries to go to the NFL level so he can be reacquainted with Shedeur. They're in Cleveland. We don't know, because Cleveland, honestly, they kind of took whoever they could get the job because there's a whole lot of people pulling their names out. So we'll see. But I think Deion's seat's a little bit warmer than Bill, Lincoln, Dabo, and even Kalen's. Now, Dave Aranda, I'll be honest. When I was first making this list and I was first thinking about it and I was looking at all the coaches that I think could have been on the hot seat, to me, Dave is one of those that I really didn't know where I should put him. I don't feel that he's in the top 3 as far as being like super, super hot seats because I don't believe Baylor has that high of expectations. But I also don't believe that he's, kind of sitting there on a warm seat because we, he's had an extended amount of time there at Baylor. He's been there since 2020. He won national title with LSU, became the head coach of Baylor, and not really a whole lot since then. He's 36 and 37, so he's one game under of being right at 500. Now, when he took over the team for COVID year, he was 2 and 7, not great, but then immediately turned around. They went 7 and 2, won the Big 12 in 2021. Fantastic. That's great. He really showed out that, when he was with Baylor then. But then it's just been nothing but hot and cold seasons since then. He went 6 and 7, 3 and 9, 8 and 5 the year before last, and then he went 5 and 7 last year. I think what will really make or break it for Dave Aranda is the fact that he did sign DJ Lagway from Florida, which is a pretty significant signing. We've seen when DJ has a good supporting staff around him, and I don't know what happened last year with the whole Billy Napier thing with everything kind of falling apart, or maybe he just kind of had that freshman magic of nobody's seen him play in college, so let's kind of see what he does. And they went on that run. And then last year, the expectations were really high. I honestly had Florida maybe being a dark horse, maybe going through the SEC, winning some games they probably necessarily shouldn't. I mean, last year they beat Texas, which was a big surprise. I don't think anybody expected them to be able to do that. But I think with him signing such a high prospect in DJ, now you have a good young quarterback that you could have potentially for the next couple of years, depending on if he decides to clear for the draft or not. How do you do with him? What does it look like? And again, the same thing. You have a lot of parity in the Big 12. The probably 2 biggest opponents that you're really going to have to face and deal with is going to be Texas Tech, BYU. You can maybe make an argument for Utah, but those are going to be the big boys that you have to fight and contend with. So where does he stack up? Is he able to get 8, 9 wins? Again, I don't know about playoff, but can he show progression and can he continue to get better? Because right now, as it stands, it's not exactly great. Now, moving into the top 5. Now, the next guy, I feel like he's about at the same heat level as Dion and Dave. The seat's a little bit warmer than Bill, Lincoln, and Dabo. It's not as warm, but it's definitely warmer. And it's one of those, if the school moved on from him, I wouldn't really be surprised because I don't believe the expectations are ridiculously high at Boston College, but I also don't expect them to just kind of let him mosey on through either, especially after, Jeff Hafley had them in a pretty good spot prior to him deciding to quit being the head coach of Boston College and go be the defensive coordinator for Green Bay. And for Bill, he took over kind of late, well, not late, but kind of in the beginning of the offseason for them. He was hired in February of 24. He took over from Hafley. He went 7 and 6 his first year, which is really good, especially for Boston College, who historically not that great. 2024, a fairly decent year for the ACC. But overall, though, that's impressive. But then he follows it up last year with a 2 and 10 season. He's 9 and 16 overall as the head coach of Boston College. That's not a great look to start with. And it's one of those, when I look at Boston College, the expectations aren't high. I don't think they're sitting here saying we need to go to the playoffs. We need to go compete for ACC titles. We need to go compete for a national title. I don't think any of that's truly there, but I do think they want better than 2 and 10. I think they potentially see how does this season go. What are the standings when it comes to about week 7, week 8, as they're about halfway through the season. And if it's not good, I could maybe see him getting maybe an early exit, but I think more likely they might let him finish and then they would probably fire him afterwards. Now, Shane Beamer, he's my number 4 guy. And to me, when I was reading through some of the articles for who is considered on the hot seat, through CBS, through ESPN, Fox Sports, all of them, the list of coaches that they had as far as on the hot seat, Shane Beamer is one. And this is one of those I get it and I don't get it. You know what I mean? And that's gonna sound weird. So he's been the head coach of them for 5 years. This would be year 6. He's had 3 winning seasons at his time there in Columbia, South Carolina. He took over in 2021. They went 7-6, won the Duke's Mayo Bowl. 2022 followed it up, went 8-5, but lost the Gator Bowl. They finished ranked 23rd that season out of 25. 2023, a little bit of a dip. They went 5-7. Followed it up in 2024. They went 9-4, lost the Citrus Bowl, but they were ranked 19th. This was Lenore Sellers, rookie, his freshman year. So there's a lot of hype and a lot of potential. It was one of those I even had, again, same with South Carolina as I did with Florida. I had them as a dark horse for potentially going into the playoffs, for potentially going into, the SEC. I thought for sure they were going to be able to do it. And they fell short last year. They went 4-8. Now, in their defense, they had an extremely brutal schedule last year. Albeit when they faced them, they weren't ranked. They ended up facing Vanderbilt last year, who ended up being extremely good. At the time, they faced number 23 ranked Mizzou. They faced number 11th ranked LSU. They faced number 14 Oklahoma. They faced number 4 Alabama, number 7 Ole Miss, number 3 Texas A&M, and then they finished the season with a loss to Clemson. Those were all losses that they had throughout that time. So they truly had the epitome of a brutal SEC schedule as far as good ranked teams that had a lot of momentum, a lot more talent. But he's still sitting there. He's 33-30 with South Carolina in the SEC. Now I know his overall SEC conference record is not great, but in true defense of that and in true respect to the SEC, that's hard to be able to win. That is a hard fought battle when you can sit there and say, yeah, I'm 33-30 as a head coach at South Carolina. My SEC record isn't the greatest, but they're competitive. And look at who I've had to face. Look at who I've had to deal with here as the head coach. And I know that's not necessarily an excuse, and I'm not trying to excuse him for his performance. However, South Carolina faces quality outside of the conference Power 4 schools. Look at last year. They faced Virginia Tech to start the season, and they end the year, facing Clemson. Now, they did have a couple cupcakes in there in between, just like most schools in every conference does, not just the SEC. But they faced quality opponents outside of their conference, and they went 1-1. So that to me kind of gives him a pass and shows, okay, we're South Carolina. We can compete. We're going to compete. Before that, heck, they even beat Clemson the year before last when they went 9-4. So to me, I get where maybe if you're the athletic director or president of South Carolina, you maybe want to move on. But considering where you're at, considering where Shane has taken the team, and considering the fact of what he's been able to do with them, how much better do you think you're going to get with a new coaching candidate? Truly. And it is also one of those, and I hate to say it because when I say this and then you look at guys like Coach Signetti, who, never been a head coach before, it's like, oh, well, what's he going to do? Oh, well, he goes 27-2 in his first 2 years. He wins the national title with a school that historically, was one of, at the time, the losingest programs in college football history in Indiana. So I get where people say, take the chance, try to catch lightning in the bottle. Don't sit here with consistency as far as Shane Beamer goes. But do you think you can do that? Is there a guy at one of the group of 6 schools that you believe, okay, he's consistently done really well. He's done really well for years and years and years. We think this is going to be our guy, especially when a couple of them, as far as, Alex Goulash and Pat Summerall, both got hired by schools in your own conference of Auburn and Florida, and you're going to have to probably face them. So I get where maybe move on and find somebody else. But my big question is, who do you think is going to potentially be that guy, and who do you think could turn that program around that quickly and have to deal with the competition that he's going to have to deal with. Because at the end of the day, they're still in the SEC. You're still going to have to face Kirby Smart in Georgia at some point throughout your coaching tenure there. He's one of the top dogs. Kirby's not going anywhere. You still have to contend with Florida, good or not, and no matter who their coach is, you're going to have to contend with them. You're going to have to contend with Josh Heupel at Tennessee. I feel like Josh is kind of underrated, but really, really good considering what he has and what he's been able to do. Vandy, the last couple of years at least. Now we don't know what Vandy's going to look like in the future, but as it stands right now, Vandy is kind of a pain that you have to deal with. Of course, you have to deal with Bama. You have to deal with LSU. Oklahoma's now in your conference. Texas is now in your conference. You're going to have to deal with them. You have Texas A&M. You have Mizzou. It's a really deep conference of really tough competition that you're going to have to face and deal with. Significantly deeper, you could argue, than the Big Ten. Now, the Big Ten has their own really good teams, but overall, you could argue the SEC might be a little bit deeper as far as competition goes, but that's just me. So that's the top. That's 4 through 10. Now these top 3 guys, I feel like truly are on the hottest seats, and I feel like a coaching change could happen during the middle of the season at some point, especially depending on how the season goes. Number 3, I've got Mike Locksley from Maryland. He's had a couple good years of really, really good stints with Maryland. But since then, prior to that and since then, it's not been good for Mike. And the reason why I say that, he's 37-49 at Maryland. When he from 2021, 2022, 2023 was his best time as a coach. He went 7-6, 8-5, 8-5, won all 3 bowl games that Maryland was invited to those years. But he's 4-8 in the last 2 seasons. And then in 2019 and 2020, he was 3-9, he was 2-3. So he's not been great. And that stretch that he was 7-6, 8-5, 8-5, he had Talia Tagovailoa as his quarterback to his brother. And so he had a quality player. He had a quality starting quarterback, and it showed with what Maryland had. Maryland had a whole lot of great NFL players on that team, and it showed. Prior to that, though, he was head coach of Maryland once before in 2015, albeit not for long. He went 1-5. And then prior even to that, he was the head coach of New Mexico from 2009 to 2011. He went 2-26. He was 1-11 in both 2009 and 2010. So he was 2-22 in 2 years with New Mexico. Then he started out 0-4 in 2011, and New Mexico fired him in the middle of the season. So he does not have a great head coaching track record anyway. Now, I know he's great as an assistant. He's great as a coordinator, and that's perfectly okay. There's a lot of guys that are that way, and no shame, nothing against them for doing that. Some guys are just better as coordinators than they are head coaches. But I feel like Mike's time at Maryland is starting to come up short, and I feel like Maryland is at this point where, again, I don't think they're trying to compete for the playoffs. I don't think they're trying to compete for a national title, but I do think they're trying to stay relevant and compete in the Big Ten. And truly and honestly, I think it might be one of those they fire Mike in the middle of the season, just depending on how things go. And then number two, I've been saying, honestly, I feel he could be my number 1 guy, as far as potentially really, really being on the hot seat. And that's Luke Fickell at Wisconsin. And I've said that ever since they fired Paul Chryst. I really didn't understand why they fired him. I thought he deserved significantly better than what he got. And I get the hype around Luke Fickell, and I get why they hired him. He was 57-18 at Cincinnati. He had that program turned around and absolutely rolling as they entered the Power, at the time, the Power 5 grouping and going into the Big 12. So I get why. And his first season at Wisconsin, 2023, he was great. He was 7-6. So he got him to a winning record. Wisconsin, okay, maybe he's started to turn this around. He's able to recruit well in the Midwest. Wisconsin's fairly decent brand. But since then, he went 5-7, 4-8. He's 12-15 since starting out 7-6. So overall, he's 17-21 at Wisconsin. That math may not be mathing. Sorry, 9-15. Yeah, I can't math. It's 9-15. There at Wisconsin since that 2023 season. He technically did win one game in 2022 as his first game. It was the bowl game. But this is one when I look at Wisconsin, especially being kind of an older college football fan, having watched college football for a long time. When I thought of Wisconsin, I think of power runners. I think of Melvin Gordon. I think of Jonathan Taylor. I think of I'm trying to think of the other kid that was from Wisconsin that got I believe he went to the Jets, if I remember correctly. That was also really good. Braylon Allen. I think of all those guys. It's like, okay, good runners. They're going to ground and pound the offense and dominant stifling defense. Look at JJ Watt, look at TJ Watt, basically all the Watt brothers that went there. And it just feels like to me, since watching Luke Fickell take over, Wisconsin just does not have that identity anymore. I really don't know what Wisconsin's identity even is. They're not a prolific passing team. They don't run the ball. They don't have a stopping, ball hawking defense. They don't really have any of that. And so to me, Luke is really, really on the hot seat. And I think truly, depending on how the season starts, if he gets off to a hot start, he might be able to save his job for one more year. But truly, I could see them firing him in the middle of the season. Now, I know for him and a lot of these coaches, they've all gotten extensions. I think Luke got an extension, not this past season, but season before in the offseason. I'll be honest, I really don't pay attention to the extensions with college football coaches because we've seen that happen a lot and they still get fired and schools figure out the money. They take the losses and then they fire somebody else and they get even more money. So I don't necessarily think his contract is going to save them. I don't think the contract of any of these guys is going to save them. I think truly if the universities are ready and they're going to move on, they're going to fire him. But Luke, honestly, I really debated on putting him at my number one. But it seemed to be the number one consensus guy as far as getting fired. And I think a guy that, aside from Kalen, with having the championship or at minimum even just conference championship competition and standards being, is Mike Norvell at Florida State. And he's 38-34 at Florida State. His best two seasons there as the head coach was 2022 and 2023. They went 10-3. Then of course they went 13-1. Jordan Travis gets hurt, and then they get destroyed by Georgia in the bowl game after winning the ACC, being undefeated but being left out of the playoffs. But prior to those two seasons, he's not been great. He was 3-6 in 2020. He was 5-7 in 2021. The super bad 2-10 season in 2024, and then last year he was 5-7. With the biggest highlight being they upset Alabama in Tallahassee to start the beginning of the year. And then after that, everything went downhill. So Mike is another one of those. I could see him getting fired in the middle of the season, just depending on how well does Florida State do. Do they start off hot? Do they kind of get to the same point? Now, if they're around the same area that they were, as far as being 5-7, 6-6, maybe even 7-6, he maybe saves his job for one more year. But I think truly if he loses, if he doesn't win at least 5 games or more, truly, I think they fire him the minute that they're ineligible for any bowl game. And I think they fire him if he's not at least still competitive in the ACC. And it's one of those that it kind of stinks because a lot of these guys, when I look, with the exception of Bill O'Brien, Bill Belichick, and technically Kalen, all these guys have been at their schools for 5-6 years now. Mike Loxley's been there for a minute. Shane Beamer's been there for a minute. Luke, not technically as long, but Mike has been there at Florida State for a minute. Dave Aranda's been at Baylor for a minute. Lincoln has technically been at USC for a minute. Now, I think out of these guys, if they do get cut or fired, I think Lincoln is going to be a hot commodity target right off the bat. If Alabama was to let Kalen go, I don't necessarily think they would, just depending again how the season goes. I think Kalen would be a hot name that's up there. Shane Beamer might be. Other than that, I really don't see many of these guys being hot commodity. And honestly, I don't even see Dabo being a hot commodity if he does get let go at the end of next season, depending on how everything finishes out, just because you haven't shown any adaptation to the new college football. And I get why he doesn't, but it's just not going to work in the new era. It's not going to work until there's some type of structure. And then maybe you can kind of go back to the old college football ways. Now, don't get it wrong. I like some of Dabo's ideas that he's had as far as fixing college football. He's definitely a guy. He's not going to complain. If he does complain, he's going to bring solutions to try to fix it. But overall, though, it will kind of stink if some of these guys end up getting fired just because of how long they've been at some of the schools. But some of the performances just don't match, unfortunately, and it kind of stinks to see. But again, let me know what y'all think in the comments. Do you like my list? Do you hate my list? Again, is there anybody you would switch out? Anybody that you would put in place of? Would you rearrange it even? Do you think there's somebody on more of a hot seat than anybody else? And Lincoln Riley, quite the upstanding name. Look, Joy. Yeah, I'm gonna be honest. I got Lincoln at 9. I don't think he's necessarily going to get fired at the end of the season, but I think his seat is fairly warm. He hasn't done much since the Caleb Williams Heisman Trophy days. He's been kind of just mediocre. There's a lot of expectations coming into the season that maybe he goes on a little bit of I'm not going to say a deep playoff run, but maybe makes a better run at the playoffs than he has in the last couple of seasons being in the Big Ten. So I think it's there. But again, I do think he's on a little bit of a hot seat because there's a lot of expectations with USC of like, hey, bring us back to being relevant, bring us back to being, USC of what we were, as bad as it sounds, 20 years ago. And he did for like one season and nothing really since. But that's my thoughts. Again, if you like this, please let me know in the comments. Tell me what you think. You can follow me at Inside the Hoosier Mind at pretty much every social media on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. If you also like this content and maybe you want to see another veteran who gives better life advice, maybe even tells better stories, connects with better, veteran-owned businesses and whatnot, check out Military Broadcast Radio. They have a whole lot of great veteran hosts. I actually have one in my comments, Terry. She runs Tracer Round podcast. She interviews so many veterans. She interviews small business owners, all of that. Definitely check her out at Tracer Rounds podcast and check out just Military Broadcast Radio in general. It's one of those, I'm not selling it. Being a veteran myself, talking to the other veterans and everybody that I work with here at the network, hearing their stories is just absolutely cool. And it helps veterans be able to connect with people. It helps even people connect with veterans to really understand who they are, what they do, why we do the things that we do. And maybe give you a better understanding of like family members, friends, maybe the person that you see working at a store that has like a veteran hat or veteran shirt, anything like that. Definitely check them out. And then of course, definitely check out Gunfighter Beard Company. A whole lot of great beard products. If you want a great beard like mine, if you think my beard is great, definitely check them out. A whole lot of great smelling stuff and great smelling stuff for the missus as well, as far as body oils, butters. They've got colognes. He has a whole bunch of stuff. And he's a veteran out of South Carolina, super small business, makes everything by hand. Believe him and his wife both do. So definitely check them out if you want great beard care and great stuff. But appreciate everybody tuning in. Love each and every single one of you. Appreciate y'all following me. Keep tuning in as the off season continues on. I'm definitely going to start a college football for dummies where hopefully I break stuff down if maybe you're not as big into college football and it's something that you want to get into, or if maybe, your significant other is like, I want to understand, but I don't want to have you explain it to me. I want somebody else to explain it to me. Hopefully I'm going to be able to be that guy that does it in a pretty good way. But again, let me know what y'all think. Appreciate and love y'all, and we will see y'all later.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in to Military Broadcast Radio. As we wrap up today's show, we want to remind you that the podcast of today's episode will be available right after we go off the air. So if you missed any part of the show or want to listen again, be sure to check it out. And remember, we're here to support and honor our veterans. Your stories and experiences matter, and we are committed to giving you a platform to share them. That's right. We're here to give our veterans a voice. So don't forget to catch the podcast and stay connected with us. Giving our veterans a voice.